So I'm going to ask all my speakers on stage, and I'm open for questions. Anybody in the audience would like to ask them some questions? Feel free to microphone. Yeah. But I think in some way it's connected. What do you think? I think it's, from the curatorship to the digital content, and then to really the basic, kind of a good refreshment of why we are here, what we do. And then from an institutional point of view, how can we become like a joint effort, put all the contents together, and then maximize and treat it as an asset. So first question, please.
Yes, thank you. Thank you all for these wonderful presentations. I thought they were all brilliant. I have a question for the last speaker, Nick. Thank you for that very logical expose. You're trying to achieve something the American way, I guess.
Despite being British.
Converting people from one area to another. What I was interested in is what do you see the role of social media to be in this case? It sounds like you want to build a virtual Balboa Park, a destination site. How do you see the role of people on social media exchanging ideas, your content perhaps, without coming to your website?
I mean, I think you have to provide that framework. If you look at Spotify, I mean, it is as much a way of engaging with music as it is a way of engaging with people who are engaging with music. So, social media is an extremely important aspect of that. And what I'm really trying to do is create this framework where it's kind of people are sharing their curated experience of the park. So people are going to the park, maybe they create their own playlists and they share it and they say, if you really want to have a valuable experience, use this. I mean, that has to be the way that is distributed and is social media. You have to layer social media on top of that. Does that explain?
I think it does. So you're saying in your content asset management, you'll be open to open it up so that everyone can play around with it, etc.
Yeah, I mean, that's an important aspect of it, and that's a challenge with a lot of museums is you've got content coming out of the museum to the visitor, but you've got to also expose yourself so that you can bring content in from the visitor and allow them to do that kind of, and the middle point is something to be negotiated, but you've got to bring those people in because you've got to make it personal. That personal connection, your mobile device is the most personal thing that you have. We take it to bed, we take it into the restroom. You've got to use that as your... I had a great quote about mobile devices, which is your mobile device is your remote control for the world around you. And that's how, Uwe talked about his girls. I have two girls. That's how they experience the world. And social media, a personal interaction with that is the only thing that works.
Right, thank you.
Can I just add one thing on that? Social media is a wonderful thing because people will put stuff up on it whether we want them to or not. It's one of the anarchic parts of our jobs. And I think this is a great thing that suddenly curators are not in total control. We would not want to control everything that goes on social media, but it does give you an opportunity to see stuff coming from multiple perspectives and from out of your area of concern, your thoughts. It's a great thing. It's about audiences doing what they want.
Great. Second questions up there. So while we're transferring the microphone, I think they just make the perfect point because I think the social media is just a tool to get how you feel, what's your experience, and I think that's most of the time people text or put on a Facebook, say, hey, I'm here, this is what I saw. So that's making the connection, but doesn't mean the content's from the museum or back and forth. So please.
Two very quick questions to two different speakers, if possible. First one is for Nick. You said a lot about content as asset, but I'm wondering if you could say a bit more about sustainability as the preservation of intellectual property. My question is, whose intellectual property, particularly in the light of the Spotify model, which has a lot of controversy around rights and property, and there's a lot of discussion about musicians pulling themselves out of Spotify for that very reason. And my quick question to Marianne, thank you for your presentation. It relates to your very gentle and very tactful critique of the algorithmic approach to curating. And I'm wondering in particular if you could say something about the role of metadata in that. It's sort of to help me understand my own hesitations and desire to actually distort and be creative with that level of metadata functioning in the algorithm. If that makes no sense, feel free to ignore my question.
Maybe that's a hard question. In terms of the metadata, what is it that you're hesitant about, other than it's, just so I can respond?
I was reading your careful critique of keywords as being also taken one step further into a critique of the generation of metadata. And maybe it overlaps with one of Nick's examples too.
Well, I mean,
fruity
you know,
et al.
They're your framing device. The algorithm is kind of, you know, it sets up the terms for the possibilities of the universe you're setting up. And it's often treated as neutral, and it's not, and that, I think, is where the creative challenge is. I don't know if I'm answering your question. Certainly, the metadata, it's one of the issues of the very moment. And this was very symptomatically a little simplistic. And the reason why Local Projects is so interesting is they're a very thoughtful firm. But put in this context, you can see there are still challenges and there are these extreme limitations. So I think it's considering it's like with everything. Actually, I would say go back to basics to unify our panel. I literally think of a painting frame or the walls of this room. You know, what can be said, what cannot be said, and that's kind of the algorithm or how you're shaping your metadata. I'm not an expert on metadata. Maybe maybe Nick is much better. I don't know which one of you know about metadata. Nick is the one. I don't know, you might have had some hidden computer chops there. But it's really like the painting frame, the pedestal, the walls, the ideological framework. There is an ideological framework to the metadata. It is not neutral. And it can be read in many ways. I mean, that's why we're so concerned about the era of surveillance. We keep being told that it's neutral, it's neutral, it's neutral, and it's not. So this was very symptomatic, and I think it can be very creatively worked. I didn't mean it to be negative, because I was trying not to make it too simplistic, to add a kind of level of questioning, while also seeing the challenge of the official, the national, or just the limitations of certain kinds of practices. So I don't know if I answered your question, but, and now Nick.
I'll attempt to answer your first question. The challenge that I see in the park, and I see this in many museums, pretty much all of them, is we create these interpretive islands, these islands of content, an in-gallery kiosk, a touch screen, which is totally disconnected from your core kind of information management. And so what I'm trying to do is help the museums in Balboa Park think about content differently. So not as I said, right now they're thinking about content as in its delivery context, as opposed to, what's the business of the museum? What does it need to do in order to create content and interpretive content that is disconnected from the technology? Because, websites, they're probably going away. Mobiles, we're getting glasses now, we're getting watches, a totally different way of interacting with content. And what museums are doing is wrapping up this content in the delivery device and not stepping back and saying, okay, we need to do a good job of managing our content. And if we do that, there are many institutions in the park right now where if they had a hard disk crash, their content is gone. I mean, it's just gone. We may have to send the disk out, to a high-price recovery service, but right now there is no sustainability and preservation in that. So part of what I want to do is create that data layer, which is as much collection content as it is interpretive content, but it's managed in a way that it is. You can back it up, you can archive it, you can deploy it in different contexts. Does that answer your question? Okay.
I think Nick is very similar to how many white label have been rewritten because it's gone. you know, from different staff members or different computers, and you have to rewrite that catalog or reinterpret, rewrite that piece of information over and over again, rather than keep it in a central space.
But you know, it goes back to what Graham was saying about, you know, create content so that you know, we live in a consumer choice world. You know, consumption of content is based on consumer choice now. So what you want to, it's not that you need to create a wall label, it's that you need to create some content that is, you know, explains and gives meaning to a work of art, and then let people consume it in whatever way they want to, which might be a wall label, but it might be a text message, you know, it might be a blog, it might be delivered on their Google Glass.
I think we have a little bit time for last question, please.
Yes, hello. This question is mainly for Graham. My name is Trine, and I'm from a fairly small art museum in Denmark. And we would really love to make meaningful, personal, intellectual, and emotional experiences for our guests. There's nothing that we would like more. But the question is, how do we make sure that people don't behave different? That what is meaningful for one person is definitely not meaningful for the other person. Our research shows that some people really like to watch the things at an arm's length distance, whereas other people would like to touch things and feel it and really engage in things. So how can we reach both these kinds of people?
Right, first of all, a little aside. I didn't mention authority when I was talking today, right? And with social media, museums are scared stiff that the public are going to take away their authority, and that's one of their big fears about social media. I think they will take away their authority, and people are doing it anyway, but people will still want the authoritative voice of the museum. I'm not worried about it. It's something we can build from. But back to you, on purely practical terms, I recommend what I call an experiential matrix, which is a simple idea, which is, say you've got 6 galleries and you've got a load of different approaches to display. You make sure that across the range you actually have different approaches for different people at different times. You can't do everything for everybody at one time, but you can, over time, over the space of your whole site, make sure that you're meeting the needs of different audiences. And of course, the other thing is that you don't want, if people want to contemplate a painting, you don't want someone screaming and running around while they're doing it. You can think of different ways of handling this. A funny experience on this one. Has everyone heard of the National Trust in England? It's a big conservation, heritage and nature conservation organisation. They're responsible for over 200 country houses, amongst other things. And they have started looking at different times of the year for different audiences. So that's July, August is for families because the schools are on holiday. And they're finding the numbers of adult couples and groups who come in September have rocketed because they're keeping away while the kids are there in July and August. So you can actually use your media and your website to suggest times when people come. Things like that. My answer to you is to look at the nature of your different audiences and to look at the different ways you can meet their needs and actually try and do it practically. But you're never going to please everybody all of the time. You're not going to please the old bores any of the time.
All right, thank you very much. Please give a round of applause for our wonderful speakers for their insight and their knowledge and their sharing. Thank you.